Hi folks, today we are going to have a look at an aligned sectional, which is the last type of sectional that we're going to discuss for the course. And to demonstrate that, we are going to use this drawing right here on page 35. It's called the base plate. And then you can do some practice here on the arbor support and, on the rotary yoke, and I believe the arbor support is the one I want you to hand in. So the idea of an aligned sectional, it's very similar to a half sectional. The problem is there are sort of triangular elements in these drawings that make a vertical cut straight through the object from top to bottom. They don't give the best view of the object, the best representation, because the bolt holes, although there is one dead center on the top, if you look down at the bottom, dead center, there is no bolt hole, but there are still two here, and they're in kind of a triangular format. So it's generally used for objects that have triangles in them. If you were to cut this object directly in half, you would be sort of misrepresenting the bottom part. And if you drew everything straight over by going through, say, this bolt hole, then you end up with an item on the right side view, the section view, that's shorter than it should be. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through an aligned sectional here and show you how you build these things. I've created the beginning portions of this drawing already because you know how to do all of these things. And I've also included a cut line that indicates that this object is going to be cut down the middle to the center and then out through one of these bolt holes and one of these end feet. And then I've also created, and I just did it by hand, I used an arc and trim, and then I just drew a couple lines to make an arrowhead to indicate that this is an aligned sectional, which means that really visually you're going to take this part of the object and kind of manually or visually rotate it down so that when you're looking at the section view over here, you understand why we have a bolt hole in a feature as opposed to nothing, which we see nothing at the bottom on the front view. So this is the front view. It's exactly what it looks like. There is a hidden section back here, but for sectional drawings, again, I normally remove the hidden lines from the front view just to try and keep things simple, but it certainly will be reflected in the section view on the right side. Just extend my cut line a little bit, and I did make my cut line thicker as I normally do. I believe I've got this set at 0.3 millimeters, so that's a good measurement. You might want to do the same. I'm going to turn on my con lines here, and I've just got a starting point. Remember, whenever we turn these objects, we always turn them so that the nose is pointing toward the front view. So my nose section is going to be here, and I should put some construction lines down to help me out with those heights so I don't have to do a whole bunch of measuring. I can just sort of trace them across. So I know that I'm going to need a line there. Oop, still got my line set at 30. Don't want that. Properties, that should be set to by layer. All right, so let's draw some con lines for heights that I know I'm going to need. Need to know where that slot is. Going to need to know where the bottom of that slot is. Going to need to know where this nose is. And where this circle is. Top and bottom, and then I'm going to throw some center lines in just so I don't have too many lines of the same color running across my page. So I'm going to turn this one right here. I'm going to call that a center line. Oops. Change it. It already exists, so I'm going to select it, and I'm going to go to my properties, and I have the right line selected. This line. Go, and I'm going to change that to layer 5 so it's a different color, and then I'm going to draw a couple more to represent the center lines for that drill hole. Except I don't want the actual center line, I want it to be a continuous line, and then I'm going to do the same thing one more time. I didn't want the long dashes, short dashes. I just want it to be a line that, that demonstrates where the center of these circles, holes, and features are. Once again, this is going to be, by default, the center line pattern. So I'm just going to change that so that it is continuous. All right, so I've got some features there. When I'm drawing an aligned sectional, almost always the bottom half looks exactly the same as the top half. For instance, if you were to rotate all of these features down to the bottom, they mirror the top part. So you really only have to build the top half, and then you can just mirror it downward if you so choose. The bottom portion is going to look like our, the bottom portion is going to be a full section. Did I say this represents a half sectional? Let me just revise that a bit. Sort of. When we do a half sectional, it's really a quarter of the object, right? You're seeing the inside of the object as well as the outside of the object. So the cut line goes down to the middle and then it goes straight out the side. So that would be a half sectional, whereas the full sectional is really half the object, right? You go straight down the middle and out through the bottom, and that will give you a half sectional representation. So it's sort of between the two, I guess. It's probably closer to a full sectional because instead of going straight out the bottom, I'm going out here, but I'm also rotating all that stuff to the bottom. So it is probably going to look more like full sectional than a half sectional, but I guess the idea that it doesn't go directly out the bottom is sort of like a half sectional. So I guess it's kind of a combination of the two. Okay, now I've got to go back to my drawing, and I need a little bit more information. I only drew the front view, so I didn't represent any depth in this object. So there's a couple things that I notice in here that I just want to make clear. First off, I've highlighted rounds and fillets are at R6. So remember, anything that looks like sort of a spray painted line, that would be a rounded or a filleted line. So this part here is going to be filleted to R6. This part here is filleted to R6. And that's just about, that's everything. Everything else has sharp lines. So that's one thing I noticed that I wanted to draw your attention. The second one is this. When you see measurements that have, more than one diameter when we're talking about a bore, what this is indicating is that there's machining tolerances. So when you were going to give this drawing to whoever is building this part or the machine process for making this part, they often send what's known as tolerances with the drawings, which means that this opening bore here, the opening of it, can be anywhere between 50 units and 50.06 units. So whatever scale we're talking here, if we're talking millimeters or centimeters or inches, there is this much tolerance for error, which means if the machine, if they put it into the CNC machine and they mill this part and then you look at the part and you measure it after, and you see that this middle bore hole here is 50.55, this part would be rejected. So that's what this is telling you, that as long as it's between 50 and 50.06, it's an acceptable part. So if you milled the part and you measured this inner bore and it came out to 50.003 or something like that, that's within the range of tolerance, so that's okay. So this is more instructions for the people building the part. Also the 45-degree core, sometimes these things are threaded, so the innermost part where the threads are at their tallest would be 45, and then anything into the depth of the thread would be a little larger, the 50. Okay, so you don't need to worry about this 45 core or this 50.06 in this drawing. The drawing you're always going to draw true to scale, which is going to be this 50 number. This is just additional information for the people who are making the part. So that's the other piece of information I wanted to give you. I indicated that there was a hidden line on this object from the front view that I didn't draw, so that's this diameter 58, and you can see it goes in 10 units. So I have to make sure that I reflect that on my section view. Okay, so I'm going to start with the nose, and I know the nose from front to back is 42, or sorry, the entire object from front to back is 42. From the very back of the object moving this way, it's 25 to where this sort of larger plate ends. So it might make more sense for me to start at the back of the object and work forward this time. So I know the entire object is 42, from the very front of the object to the very back. I have a starting line set up here. So I'm going to go to the back of the object. I'm going to select this line. I'm going to offset it 42 to find out where the back of the object is. So the back of the object is right there. Now I can use some object lines because I am just going to give myself a rough outline of where this object is going to be. So this is the back portion. This is the very front portion, including the nose. So I need to figure out where that back portion sort of ends up before it starts narrowing into the nose. And the dimension is given right here. It's 25 from the back of the object. So I'm going to go to this back of the object line. And sorry, what did I say? 22, 25. Okay, so I'm going to offset this one, 25. So from the back of the object toward the front, there's 25. So I know that's where the thickest portion of this, or the larger portion of this object is. So I'm going to draw that out. Now if I have to trim these lines a little bit later, that's fine. And as I mentioned before, the front of the object is only, the top side of the object can be mirrored down to get the bottom. So I'm only going to draw this to the halfway point. And then when I'm happy with it at the end, I can just mirror it down. All right, so how far down does this part go? It goes down to the nose, which is that height right there. So that's this red line. Okay? And then the nose comes all the way out to the front of the object. And then I'm going to go down to the halfway point, and I'm going to come all the way across. That's dead center of the object if you're looking at it. If you're looking at it from the front view. So all I've drawn is basically the top half of this object, and I haven't drawn any of the circles or the features yet. I've just drawn a rough outline of where this bigger part is and where the nose is. And now we can start getting a bit more detailed on what this actually looks like. All right, so if we're cutting this directly down the center, what we're seeing is we're essentially seeing this and down to there because we've cut it on the other half of that. So we need to make sure that we can see the bottom of this little feature here as well as this top part. We can see the top part right there. The bottom part here is just going to look like a line straight across. So I can just stick with my object layer and then just make sure I'm at the bottom of that little trough, and all you're going to see from the side view, if that's cut off, is just a line there. Okay. Then we've got solid material from that feature until this borehole. So this borehole has a depth. It's in the nose, but it doesn't go all the way through the object. It has a depth of 23. So I need to note where that 23 is because that's where these bolt holes have to end, which means it's 23 from the front in the measurement they gave us, right? It's pointing at the front of the object. So that 23 deep means that this line at the front of the object, okay, needs to be offset backwards. So offset 23 backwards, which is going to put it right there. So this yellow line here, you'll notice, is in the thicker part or in the larger part of this object, the cylindrical object, which means it goes all the way through the nose and into this back plate a little bit. That's what that yellow line indicates. So we already have the other lines that we need. We just need to find where the top of that circle is or that bolt hole is and the bottom, and make sure we start at the very front of the nose and go back until we hit that yellow line. Okay, then we're going to go down to where the hole ends on the bottom and then straight out the front again. So that indicates a hole that is only 23 deep. It doesn't go all the way through the object. There's going to be solid metal behind it still. That gets us down to this inner bore, which I didn't draw a line across for, and I should have. So I'm just going to copy this CO for copy, and then I grab a base point, some intersection, and then I bring it down to there. So I have the larger bore opening, so that's the big hole in the middle. At this point, I should draw that to indicate that it is going through, and it goes all the way through the object. So I can draw this straight out to the back. So this hole goes all the way through the object and out the back. I'm going to indicate that. Okay. At this point, I should probably turn off a few con lines just to show you what we've drawn in our object layer and what relates to what. Okay, so this section up here represents half of this U-shaped feature, the part you can see if you cut it in half. This right here represents this bolt hole, which only goes in 23 units. Okay, so if you cut that in half, you'll just see this is the bolt hole, and the rest of this stuff is just solid metal. And then right here is the first half, or the top half, of the bigger opening, which goes all the way through. So that's what I've represented so far on this sectional view. And I do not want to forget about this little cutout area in the rear portion. It's a diameter of 58 and it goes in 10 units. So I'm going to offset from the back of the object 10 units toward the front to take care of that little 10. So let's just, I can basically use any line I want. I will keep those other command lines off for now, just to reduce clutter and make sure you know what I'm doing. And I'll recreate that line right there, which represents the back of the object. So I'll select that line. And then I will offset that line 10 toward the front of the object to represent this measurement of 10, this gap right here. Now I need to know how high that little cutout goes from the center. They give us a diameter, so it's 58 from one end of this to the bottom. I'm only going to the halfway point, so I'm just going to chop that in half and find what the radius would be. So from here to the center of the object, half of 58 is 29. So if I offset this middle line, I offset that 29 straight up, that's going to give me the point where this little cutoff ends. So now I can draw that in my object layer because I know it goes, excuse me, I know it goes in from this point. Make sure I got my line tool on. Okay, so I know it goes in from this point, 10 units. So there's the 10 units, and then it goes down to where it hits the larger hole. So this part right now goes down, and then it just runs into the bigger center bore, which means that this line right here is no longer needed. So I could cut out this chunk right here, or I can just bring it back to where it intersects with that larger gap. Turn off my con lines here. Again, just keep it nice and clean. What else? I got those ones on. Okay. Great, so the only thing I added there was I added this little chunk right here to represent that portion that was hidden on the front view, but we can see it's clearly notched out, which means it's clearly notched out through the entire object, including where it hits this. Because our aligned sectional, the goal of it is to take this lower, or this right sort of third on a 60-degree angle, and visually just pretend that we spin this entire thing down. It is actually going to mirror the top. There's nothing different on the bottom side or on this portion than what you see up here. It is exactly the same, which means if I mirror this part down, I'm okay, I'm in good shape. But first, I'm just going to delete, I'm going to keep that. I'm going to mirror it down. Okay, so I'm going to select everything that I have so far, and then I'm going to select the mirror tool. And then it needs to know, what do I want to mirror? What line do I want to mirror it over? Well, the line I want to mirror it over is just the horizontal line right through the middle. So I can do that. I don't know why this is. Every time that I mirror something, I'm sure you've seen this in about 10 videos so far, I get it to this point, and then for some reason I click and I forget to hit the space bar. The space bar at the end is what says, yeah, this is what I want to do. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of this line that I had right in the middle because it doesn't actually exist. It is going to be replaced with a real center line. And won't let me delete you. Let's try again. There we go. Internet's just a little slow. So I think we've got this object pretty well dialed in. Now now we should crosshatch the areas that we know are bare metal. So we'll go to our crosshatch section, and we have to modify this a little bit depending on what sort of hatch we use. So I'm just going to select the areas that I know need to be hatched. Actually, that's not an area because that's a cutout. That's that's the cutout formed by this U shape at the top here. So that's actually not part of the material that I want to have crosshatched. I want to have everything in here crosshatched except for the bolt hole, so that's the outside area, and then the same thing on the bottom. So really those are the only two cross-hatched areas because this is that little U cutout, this is the bolt hole, and this is the larger inner bore. Okay, so let's hatch that by hitting space again, and it's going to give us that ugly defaulted angle iron, whatever it is, hatch. So we're going to go into our properties for that. Our hatch pattern, we decided on line being the nicest of the bunch. So let's find our line. And doesn't like that search, so I have to find it manually. Line there should be. Okay, so let's do line, and then we don't like straight across. We want an angle. Angle 45 is fine. And then what sort of distance have we got between them? That's probably okay, but I'll just double that scale to 2, get a few more lines. Oh, sorry, my mistake. We'll have it 0.5. Just get a few more lines in there, make it a little bit more obvious that that's a hatched area. And now we'll worry about our center lines and our center marks. So this is really just trivial. We also have a round that I forgot about. We've got R6 on the outside of this larger plate and also where it meets the nose. Actually, and that's going to affect our hatch a little bit, and I'll show you why. So I'm actually just going to get rid of the hatch. Good thing I double checked. And we're going to put in those rounds. So those rounds are happening up here, and they're happening in this section right here. If they do not happen at the end of the nose, you can see that's a very sharp line, not the little straight dainty line. So let's do these fillets right here. R6 on the fillets, I believe. Yep, R6. So we are going to do a radius of 6. And then you just pick the 2 objects you want to round. I want to round that one to that one. And then I want to round, exact same round or fillet from there to there. So we've got those 2 rounded out. And the nose, yeah, okay, so that looks good. And the reason I did that before I hatched is because my hatch goes in this area, so if I had it closed off with that 90-degree corner, it's not going to hatch around the rounded area, and I need it to. I mean, to be accurate. It's not a huge deal if I wouldn't have done that, but definitely the hatch wouldn't look quite right. Alright, so I've got my hatch going a little too far. I don't want it to hatch in that section. And I suspect that might be happening because this line I drew right here was prior to the hatch, which means I have to bring it out to where it meets that rounded. So when I said the hatch, I meant the fillet. So there was a little gap in there, and when there's any little gap, when you use the hatch tool, it tries to fill that gap, just like water flowing through an opening into another space. All right, so the top half is filleted properly now, which means that my bottom half is incorrect. So I'm just going to select everything in the bottom half of this object, delete it, and then mirror it again. So now that I've got my fillets correct, I might as well hatch it here and then fillet the hatch, or mirror the hatch. We'll take our hatch, make sure it's just grabbing this area and not the area above. It looks good now that I've joined those points up. Okay, so we know we're doing a hatch. Hit spacebar. It'll fill it with. There we go. Fill it with that ugly angle. We'll go to our properties. Our hatch is going to. I wonder if it's capitals. Line. Yeah, it's capitals. There we go. Line. And our angle was 45, and we decided the scale of 0.5 looked pretty good. At least I decided. Okay, so that is a nice hatch there, and you notice if I go into the rounded section, the hatch includes the area that would have, it would have been a little short. If I kept that angle, you wouldn't have seen hatching in this area before I did the round. So make sure you do your hatching last. Now I'm in a position where I can just copy that top half. And by copy, I mean mirror it, because I want to mirror it down from the center line, which is really imaginary line that runs right there through the center of the object. Hit spacebar. Remember to this time. Everything should be mirrored down properly. Our rounds look good, and now it's just closing up our object the way we normally do with our center lines. I'm going to I'm actually going to change these to my green center line. This is the one I've got for indicating where the center is, and I usually use the purple one as the marks that I leave on the drawing for center lines and center marks, so I'm actually not sure why I used purple there. But I can change it to this center, which is the one I wanted to use in the first place. Now when I go use the real center line, I'm going to start inside my object, and I'm going to go out the back and a little bit out front. Try to match it up with what I've got at the rear there. And actually, if you've got an object like this, you can draw it too long. It's not a big deal, because you can just go grab that line afterward and then move it from the middle point of the line the middle point between, you know, here and here, which probably I've marked somewhere. Okay. And I'm going to use this same center line. So I'm going to copy it, CO. I'm going to copy it right from the middle of this thing. And I'm going to put it in the middle of this one. I don't have a midpoint here, so I'm going to have to just kind of estimate this one. I can always change it if I want to. And I can mirror that down after I'm happy with everything else. And then I also need another one from here, dead center, which will be right there. Okay, now none of these lines appear to be dashing, have the long, short, long dashes that we need. So what I'm going to do is select them all. I'm just going to hide my other layers for now. Okay. And you know what? I'll do that as my very last step because I'm going to want to do it for the center marks too. So just change my mind a little bit there. Okay, now I'm going to mirror these down. MI for mirror. And I'm mirroring them based on the center of this object. Okay, so I've got the bottom portion there, and now I need to make some center marks for all these bolt holes. There's an automatic tool for this in the real version of AutoCAD, but we got to do them manually here, as I don't think they have the center mark feature in this version. Not a big deal. Okay, center marks. So this one needs to go to there. Okay, and then I can just do a polar array with this. I will do a polar array. It's good practice for polar arrays. And it's going to be polar. And our center point is going to be there. And I'm just going to pick the number of items. It'll space them properly. 4. So there we go. And you'll know it's dead center and perfectly measured. Same thing for all of these bolt holes. Exact same process. That, do a polar array, polar, center point is the center point of the circle, and then how many items do I want? I want 4, so it just makes a little crosshair, and now I am in a position where I can take that and copy it a couple more times, CO copy from the, whoops, not from there, mouse is a little slower today here, from my browser. Copy this from here to there and there. And is it big enough to be there as well? Sorta. I think I'd like it a little bit longer. Okay, now this one here, the center point looks weird because the hole is on an angle and the center point is straight up and down. So that looks a little bit weird. You'll notice that the angle here on that center bolt makes it look a little bit more natural. So if I'm going to draw one up top, that one's going to be easy. That one's just the way we would draw any of the rest of them. Just go up or left a little bit outside the object. And then this feature is just a little bit bigger than the hole, so I just wanted these center marks to be a little bit bigger. It's the exact same process. Polar array. Okay, so polar array. Center is our center point. How many items? Still want 4. Okay, there we go. And then I'll take the same line. Now this is not strictly necessary, okay, but if I can make it look good, and I think it helps, I'd leave it there. So I'm just debating rotating this a little bit, RO for rotate, and if I rotate it 60 degrees, I'm just debating if it'll actually, yeah, that looks good. Okay, so that looks reasonably indicative of a center point. I don't think it complicates the drawing. I think it helps by indicating that's a center point. So I'm going to take the exact same thing and do it over here. Except that this one needs to be angled differently. Okay, same process, grabbing the top one, copying it from the center to the center. And then I'm going to rotate this. RO to rotate, and the same thing, just in the other direction. I want to make sure that this is at 30 degrees from horizontal. Okay, so I think that is all right. I think we've got everything represented. One more thing, now that I look closer, I should do some measurements here as well, but as I look at this, the only other thing is you would be able to see this. Because it's deeper, this section is deeper than this section. If you cut it in half, you'll see the point at which it becomes deeper. So that line does need to be there. And I think everything else is in good shape. I'm just going to turn off my real line right now, my object line. Just hide it, and then I'm going to grab all of these center marks. I'm going to go into the properties for those center marks. And my line type scale is fine. What did I want? My line type needs to be hidden. Not hidden, I'm sorry. Center. But it also needs to have a scale that shows the long dash, short dash. So let's try 0.5. Let's see what that gives us. Long dash, short dash, looks okay here. For some reason I didn't get these ones. Center, 0.5, let's try 0.5 on those ones, let's see. Okay, still not seeing it on the center marks. One. Yep, nope, still not seeing it on my center marks. These ones are okay. That might actually be a little bit small, so let's try again. Let's try maybe 2. Okay, 2 looks good for these ones. I might just have to leave these center marks as they are, because if I adjust them, I'm worried that the other ones are going to change too much. Let's try 5. But making it bigger shouldn't actually help. Making it smaller would be the only thing. Okay, so I'm going to have to keep those center marks as they are. Again, you got to use some judgment every once in a while as to, should I include a certain set of lines? Should I not include a certain set of lines? All right, I got to keep con 5 on, because that shows my cut line, and that also shows this, and these aren't supposed to be on layer 5, so I should get rid of those. This line here should be the thicker. Okay, that's all fine. I'll turn my object lines back on. Should be able to see my cut line dead through the center. Okay, that's good. Okay, cut line goes out through this section here. Okay, there's an indication that this is an aligned sectional with this arc and arrow. And then you've got your aligned sectional, including your center points and center lines in this view. So that's how you do an aligned sectional. It's really not that much different than doing a full sectional. You just have to remember your cut lines and to indicate that it's aligned by rotating this way. And could we clean up this drawing a little bit? Yes, possibly. Maybe there's some things that I could do a little differently. Maybe you don't feel like these center marks are helping much. So it wouldn't be terrible if you got rid of that one. Could also get rid of this one if you really wanted to. Depends what you think makes it makes the object representation or the picture more or less useful. So there could be a debate made that maybe that one doesn't need to be there. Maybe it's helpful to have that one there. Again, you're gonna have to use your judgment on some of this stuff, and there isn't necessarily a right and wrong answer. But you should have enough tools in your tool belt now to give the stabilizer yoke a shot, and then complete the assignment for aligned sectionals. As always, if you've got any questions, please let me know.